What if two families arrived in America at almost the same time? They spoke similar languages, shared ancient Celtic roots, and even looked alike. Yet one group would eventually spread into nearly every corner of the United States, while the other became famous for building powerful frontier communities. For centuries, historians and genealogists have debated one fascinating question: were the Irish or the Scottish more influential in shaping America? Today, we're comparing the history behind their surnames, the journeys their families took across the Atlantic, and the remarkable legacy they left behind. The answer may surprise you, because these two peoples were connected long before America even existed. Thousands of years ago, much of Ireland and Western Scotland shared a common Celtic culture. The Celts weren't one single nation, but a collection of tribes connected by language, traditions, trade, and warfare. As Celtic culture spread across Western Europe, Ireland developed into a land of Gaelic kingdoms, while Western Scotland was heavily influenced by Irish settlers who crossed the narrow stretch of water known as the North Channel. One of the most important early kingdoms was Dal Riata, a Gaelic kingdom that stretched across parts of northeastern Ireland and western Scotland. People crossed freely between these lands for generations. They traded together, fought together, married into each other's families, and shared many of the same customs. At this point in history, there were no permanent surnames. Family identity was based on immediate ancestry rather than inherited last names. As centuries passed, Ireland became one of the first places in Europe to develop hereditary surnames. By the 10th century, powerful Gaelic clans had already begun passing family names from one generation to the next. This was centuries before many other parts of Europe adopted the same practice. Some of these surnames are still among the most common today: Murphy, Kelly, O'Brien, O'Neill, O'Connor, Sullivan, Doyle. The prefixes themselves told an important story. O generally meant descendant of, while Mac meant son of. A surname like O'Brien identified someone as a descendant of Brian, while McCarthy meant the son of Carthy. These names represented much more than family identity. They connected people to powerful clans, respected leaders, and territories that had often been controlled by the same families for generations. In medieval Ireland, your surname could reveal your ancestors, your homeland, your political alliances, and sometimes even your social status. Loyalty to the clan shaped almost every part of life. Scotland's story unfolded quite differently. Unlike Ireland, Scotland was home to several distinct cultures. There were Gaelic-speaking Highlanders, the mysterious Picts, Britons in the south, Norse settlers along the islands and northern coast, and later, Norman families who arrived from France after the Norman conquest. Because of this mixture, Scottish surnames developed from many different traditions. Some came from Gaelic ancestors. Others were based on occupations, locations, or noble titles. Norman influence also introduced many French-origin family names into Scotland. Names like Campbell, Stewart, Douglas, Fraser, Bruce, Graham, MacDonald, and Mackenzie became associated with some of the country's most powerful clans. Like Ireland, Scotland also used the prefix Mac. But Scottish clan identity gradually became tied not only to ancestry but also to land. Powerful chiefs ruled castles, commanded warriors, and controlled large territories. Entire valleys could belong to a single clan, and many people living under a chief's protection weren't necessarily related by blood. Loyalty to the clan mattered just as much as shared ancestry. For centuries, Scotland's clans fought one another for power while also defending their lands against outside enemies. Rivalries between clans sometimes lasted for generations, creating legends that are still remembered today. Although Ireland and Scotland shared ancient roots, their histories slowly drifted apart. Everything changed when England expanded its influence. Ireland experienced the Norman invasion in 1169, marking the beginning of centuries of English involvement. Over time, English control grew stronger. Many Gaelic chiefs lost their lands, traditional clan authority weakened, and religious divisions deepened after the Protestant Reformation. Catholic Irish families often faced discrimination, economic hardship, and restrictions on land ownership. Scotland faced its own struggles. The country fought famous wars for independence, producing legendary figures like William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. Eventually, the Scottish and English crowns united under one monarch, and later the kingdoms themselves were joined together. But political union didn't bring prosperity to everyone. In the Scottish Highlands, life changed dramatically during the 18th and 19th centuries. Landowners began removing thousands of tenant families from lands their ancestors had occupied for centuries. These events became known as the Highland Clearances. Entire villages disappeared. Families carrying names like MacDonald, Cameron, Fraser, Mackenzie, and MacLeod were forced to leave their ancestral homes. Some moved into Scottish cities. Many looked west across the Atlantic. America represented opportunity, land, and the possibility of beginning again. Not long afterward, Ireland experienced an even greater tragedy. In 1845, a devastating potato blight destroyed the country's main food crop. The Great Irish Famine lasted for several years and changed Irish history forever. More than 1 million people died. Another million left the country. Ships carrying desperate families crossed the Atlantic toward North America, often under terrible conditions. Many passengers owned almost nothing except the clothes they wore, and the surnames passed down through generations: Murphy, Kelly, Ryan, Sullivan, O'Connor. These family names began appearing in American port records in astonishing numbers. By the middle of the 19th century, millions of Irish and Scottish immigrants had reached the United States. Some came searching for opportunity. Others escaped starvation. Many fled political conflict or economic hardship. But once they arrived in America, something remarkable happened. Their surnames began spreading across the continent in very different ways. Some families settled in crowded eastern cities. Others pushed westward onto the frontier. Some became politicians, soldiers, businessmen, and community leaders. Others quietly built farms, churches, schools, and towns that still exist today. And that's where the real comparison begins. Because although the Irish and Scottish shared ancient origins, their journeys through America would create two very different legacies. In the next part, we'll compare the most influential Irish and Scottish surnames, discover where these families settled, and find out which names became some of the most recognizable across the United States. When millions of Irish and Scottish immigrants reached America, they didn't settle in the same places. Their choices would shape the future of entire states, cities, and communities. Irish immigrants largely arrived through major eastern ports such as New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. Many had very little money. They settled wherever work was available, taking jobs in construction, factories, shipping docks, railroads, and public services. The Scottish followed a somewhat different path. Many Scottish immigrants, especially those from the Highlands, moved farther inland. Others settled in North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Tennessee, and later across the American frontier. Many became farmers, merchants, soldiers, and community leaders. Although both groups helped build America, their surnames spread in noticeably different patterns. Let's begin with the Irish. One surname appears again and again throughout American history: Murphy. Today, Murphy is one of the most common Irish surnames in both Ireland and the United States. The name comes from the ancient Gaelic O Murchada, meaning descendant of Murchad, a personal name often associated with sea warriors. As Irish immigrants arrived during the 19th century, thousands of Murphy families settled throughout New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, and California. Another famous surname was Kelly, derived from the Gaelic O Chiale, The name is often associated with descendants of ancient Irish kings and regional rulers. Kelly families became especially common in Boston, New York, and Pennsylvania. Then came Sullivan. Originating in County Cork, the Sullivan clan was once one of the most powerful Gaelic families in southwestern Ireland. Following the Great Famine, thousands carrying the Sullivan surname emigrated to America, where the name quickly spread across eastern cities before moving west. The surname Ryan also became increasingly common. Originally associated with County Tipperary, Ryan families established communities across the Midwest, particularly in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Then there was O'Connor, one of Ireland's oldest royal surnames. The O'Connor dynasty produced several High Kings of Ireland long before English rule expanded across the island. Although many branches lost political power, the surname survived and eventually crossed the Atlantic with countless emigrants seeking a new beginning. Now let's cross the Irish Sea to Scotland. Few Scottish surnames are as famous as Campbell. The Campbells became one of Scotland's most influential clans, controlling enormous territories in the Highlands. Their political influence lasted for centuries. When Scottish families migrated to America, the Campbell surname became widespread throughout the Appalachian region and later across the expanding western frontier. Another legendary name was MacDonald, one of the largest Highland clans. The MacDonalds claimed descent from Somerald, a powerful medieval ruler with both Gaelic and Norse ancestry, even after the Highland Clearances forced many families from their homes. The MacDonald surname survived and flourished overseas. Today it remains one of the world's best-known Scottish family names. The surname Stewart also carried remarkable prestige. The House of Stewart eventually ruled Scotland and later England, producing generations of kings and queens. As ordinary Stewart families settled throughout America, their surname became one of the most recognizable in the country. Another famous Scottish surname was Fraser, known for military service and Highland traditions. Fraser families established themselves across North America after leaving Scotland during the 18th and 19th centuries. Then there was Douglas, one of medieval Scotland's greatest noble families. The Black Douglases became legendary warriors during the Scottish Wars of Independence. Although their political fortunes rose and fell over the centuries, the Douglas surname continued to spread throughout America as new generations searched for opportunity. By the late 19th century, Irish surnames had become especially concentrated in major American cities. Walk through neighborhoods in Boston to Chicago, Philadelphia, or New York, and names like Murphy, Kelly, Sullivan, Ryan, O'Brien, and O'Connor appeared everywhere. Many Irish families became police officers, firefighters, teachers, labor leaders, and politicians. Their influence extended into every level of public life. Scottish surnames followed a different pattern. Campbell, Stewart, Mackenzie, Graham, Douglas, and MacDonald often appeared in rural communities, farming regions, military settlements, and frontier towns stretching from Pennsylvania to the Carolinas, and eventually into Kentucky and Tennessee. This difference shaped how later generations viewed each group. Irish communities became closely associated with America's growing cities. Scottish communities became closely connected with the expanding frontier. Of course, the story wasn't always that simple. One important group deserves special attention: the Scots-Irish, also known as the Ulster Scots. These families were originally Scottish Protestants who settled in Northern Ireland during the 17th century before emigrating to America. Although many people simply called them Irish after arriving in America, their ancestry was largely Scottish. They became some of the earliest pioneers moving into the Appalachian Mountains and beyond. Many famous American frontier families traced their roots to these Scots-Irish communities. Because of this, surnames such as Campbell, Graham, Stewart, and McDowell became deeply connected with early American expansion. Meanwhile, Irish Catholic immigration reached its peak during and after the Great Famine. These later arrivals transformed America's largest cities and helped fuel rapid industrial growth during the 19th century. By the early 20th century, both Irish and Scottish surnames had become firmly woven into American society. Some families entered politics. Others became military heroes. Some founded universities, businesses, newspapers, and churches. Their surnames appeared on schools, bridges, public buildings, and even entire towns. But when researchers examine census records and immigration documents, an interesting pattern begins to emerge. One group appears to have spread more widely across urban America, while the other maintained a particularly strong presence throughout rural communities and the expanding frontier. So which surname tradition ultimately became more widespread across the United States? The answer isn't determined by a single famous family. It's revealed by population records, migration patterns, and generations of descendants. So, after centuries of migration, hardship, and new beginnings, which families ultimately spread farther across America? The answer depends on what we mean by spread. If we're talking about population, Irish surnames eventually became more common. The Great Irish Famine triggered one of the largest waves of immigration in American history. Between the 1840s and the early 1900s, millions of Irish men and women arrived in the United States. As their families grew over generations, surnames like Murphy, Kelly, Sullivan, Ryan, O'Brien, and O'Connor became familiar across nearly every state. Today, many Americans with Irish surnames may have ancestors who arrived during that difficult period, carrying little more than hope for a better future. But if we're talking about early influence, the Scottish story becomes just as impressive. Long before the Great Famine, Scottish immigrants, and especially the Scots-Irish, were already moving deep into the American frontier. They settled in the Appalachian Mountains, crossed the Blue Ridge, explored the Ohio Valley, and pushed westward into Kentucky and Tennessee. Many frontier communities were founded by families carrying Scottish surnames. These settlers built cabins, cleared forests, established churches, and created towns where none had existed before. Their descendants continued moving west for generations, eventually reaching Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, and beyond. This is one reason why Scottish surnames are still common throughout many rural parts of the United States today. Over time, both groups contributed enormously to American society. Irish Americans became highly visible in politics, law enforcement, labor unions, education, journalism, and public service. Scottish Americans earned reputations as soldiers, pioneers, inventors, ministers, educators, and entrepreneurs. Their contributions often reflected the different places where they first settled, but together they helped shape the nation. As interest in family history has grown, millions of people have begun researching their own surnames. Genealogy websites, DNA testing, and historical records have allowed families to reconnect with ancestors they never knew existed. Someone with the surname Murphy may discover relatives who left County Cork nearly 2 centuries ago. A Campbell family in North Carolina may trace its roots back to the Highlands of Scotland. A Stewart living in Texas might learn that his ancestors first settled in Pennsylvania before moving south with the frontier. Every surname tells a story, not just of one person, but of generations. However, one important myth should be cleared up. Many people believe that sharing a surname automatically means sharing the same ancestor. In reality, that's not always true. Throughout history, different families sometimes adopted the same surname independently. Some names were based on occupations, while others came from places or personal names. For example, not every Campbell descends from the powerful Highland clan. Not every O'Brien is directly descended from the medieval High King Brian Boru. And not every Stewart belongs to the royal house of Stewart. Surnames can point towards historical connections, but they cannot prove a specific family relationship on their own. That's why historians rely on birth records, church registers, census documents, wills, land records, and other evidence when tracing family histories. Modern DNA testing can also provide clues, but even DNA cannot identify a famous ancestor with certainty without supporting historical records. Perhaps that's what makes genealogy so fascinating. Every discovery answers one question while creating another. A single family name can lead to forgotten villages, ancient castles, ship passenger lists, military records, or handwritten documents preserved for hundreds of years. Behind every surname is a journey. Some journeys crossed mountains, others crossed oceans. Some families left because they wanted adventure, others had no choice at all. The Irish carried memories of famine, hardship, and resilience. The Scottish carried stories of clan loyalty, Highland traditions, and frontier determination. Both groups endured extraordinary challenges. Both sacrificed everything to build new lives, and both left lasting marks on the history of the United States. So, Irish surnames or Scottish surnames, which families spread farther across America? If measured by numbers alone, Irish surnames eventually became more widespread due to the massive immigration waves of the 19th century. But if measured by their role in settling the frontier and establishing early communities, Scottish families, and especially the Scots-Irish, left an equally remarkable legacy. In the end, there isn't a single winner. America's story was written by both, one surname at a time, one family at a time, and one generation after another. The next time you hear a surname like Murphy, Campbell, Kelly, Stewart, Sullivan, or MacDonald, remember that it may represent a journey stretching back hundreds of years across storms, wars, kingdoms, and oceans. A simple family name can carry an extraordinary history. And perhaps your own surname has a story waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed this comparison and would like to see more historical surname battles, such as Norman versus Viking, Anglo-Saxon versus Norman, or French versus German immigrant surnames, be sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments which comparison you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next journey through history.